Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Jeb Smith, Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage, and today we're talking about dual agency. Can an agent represent both the buyer and the seller on a real estate transaction? I did a video on this a couple months back. It's called What is Dual Agency? I'll link to that above here. If you want more information on dual agency, click that, check that out. But otherwise, let's address the question. Can a real estate agent represent both the buyer and the seller? And the answer is yes. In the state of California, they allow a listing agent, say I was listing a property, they allow me to not only represent the seller, but they also allow me to represent the buyer on that transaction. And today we're going to talk about, is it cool? Is it a good thing for you as a buyer to come in and work with the listing agent? What are the potential issues with that? So, as somebody that's been doing this 15 years, a professional in the business, what I will say is it's a gray area, right? Although it's allowed, it's one of those things that shouldn't be taken lightly. And the reason I say that is because there are a lot of agents out there that don't do dual agency properly. And what I mean by that is that as an agent who is able to do dual agency here in the state of California, it is your obligation to represent both the seller and the buyer equally, right? So you can't favor one party over the other in doing dual agency and representing both parties. And what I see often times is that, they favor one side versus the other. So as a buyer, is it in your best interest to get your own agent to represent you? Even though I'm in the business and I benefit from dual agency, I would tell you yes, it's usually in your best interest to have someone represent you differently than the listing agent, because it is a gray area, right? If I know hypothetically what the seller is willing to take on a property, so say for example we sign a listing agreement at $1 million, but they tell me, hey, look, I know we're listed at $1 million, but I'm willing to take an offer at $920. If you can give me an offer at $920, I'm willing to accept it. That's one of the reasons I don't want to know what the seller wants to start. But if a seller tells me that, in the back of my head, I know that they want $920. Well, if I have a buyer coming to me directly and they say, hey, Jeb, I want you to write an offer for me, but I think $1 million is a little high. I want to write it for $900,000. I think 900 is the number. Well, in the back of my head, I said, well, I know they'll take $920, so chances are I'm just trying to get that buyer up to a $920 offer because I know that the seller said that they would take that $920. Whereas if I had no idea what the seller said they would take, then I would be a lot more likely to say, hey, look, you guys are $100,000 apart here. Why don't we try an offer at X? And this is why. And so I would be probably a little more, I would be more likely to try to get them a higher price, say $950 or $960 or whatever that number is, if I didn't know. Now, that's not to say that I'm doing that. I'm just telling you how most people think, right? Once they have a number in their head, they're kind of sticking to that number. Or if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I list the property at $1 million. They say, look, I'm not willing to accept anything under $1 million. And then I have a buyer come to me directly and say, hey, look, I want to offer 900. And I say, well, the seller said they won't accept anything under, what it's listed for. And then the buyer says, well, I'm not willing to go up that high. I might not be willing to write that offer for that buyer because I know what the seller has said. Whereas if you don't know, you're more likely to try to negotiate on that person's behalf. So I'm much more likely to try to get that buyer to write an offer, which I would always do anyway. I would always tell you to write an offer just to get something in to start the negotiation process. And then, maybe that seller changes their mind about what they're willing to accept. But at the end of the day, in knowing numbers and having two parties to represent, it's very difficult to not use what you know in order to put deals together. And so that's where it's a bit gray. So if you don't know numbers and you're representing two parties, it's a lot it's a lot easier to represent both parties equally and to, come to a common agreement. And that's, one of my things in representing dual agency is I always tell clients, hey, look, in listing your property, I don't want to know what you will take for the property, because if a buyer does come to me directly and I represent them, I don't want to have your number in my head. I want to be able to negotiate, and help both parties come to a common ground here, versus having your number stuck in my head and not being able to fully negotiate, to the best of my ability for not only you, but for the buyer. So, it's one of those things that, I would tell you, when you got two different parties representing, one representing the buyer, one representing the seller, you're much more likely to have both parties negotiate on their, for both parties, to the best of their ability, versus one party just kind of half negotiation on two parties just trying to get a deal together, get a deal closed. So I hope that's helpful. If you do have additional questions about dual agency, about representing both a buyer and a seller, reach out to me directly, comment below. I know there's a lot of real estate agents out there that don't agree with what I'm saying because they want to double in deals, but the reality is there's a lot of states that don't allow it for this very reason, because it can be a liability. It is not it's not black and white. It is very much a somewhere in the middle, which is a gray area, and that's how I feel about it. So if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.